Hello. I look like death incarnate. I really do not look good. I think I still have to figure out this lighting, and it's winter in Chicago, so everyone looks like kind of gray sludge, and I'm no exception. Hello, welcome back. It's been a long time. You haven't seen me in a minute, and for all my dear subscribers, all of you, all 7 of you, I'm so sorry. I've been so busy, and I feel like I just have been putting this off. Do have a full-time job, so sometimes that gets in the way, and also just life, friends getting married, summer things, Christmas, all that stuff. So I haven't done anything in a while. Hey. But it's the new year, so I'm super excited, and I have actually, for some reason, just like a burst of creativity. So I really want to do a lot of videos and get into a more consistent schedule. So here we are. Yes, I should be doing like a top 5, bottom 5. That was my original idea to show off my reads for 2022. I read 40 books in 2022. It's an average number. That video is coming forthwith, but for now I thought I would just do a January wrap-up, since that is just kind of a nice, simple, easy one, and it just gives you an update as to where I am. I've read 4 books in January, which, you know, doesn't seem like a whole lot, but for me that's a whole lot, because I am usually someone who likes to read just 1 book at a time, but with how many little commitments, book clubs I have lately, I gotta read more. And honestly, I just have so much momentum to read right now that I'm happy to read a bunch more. So I thought I'd go over my January reads. The first one that I finished, which, cheating, I kind of started it in December, but I finished it and read a bulk of it in January, so I count it as a January read. And that is Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. I am reading this because this was part of the Dickens versus Tolstoy book club with booktubers Emma and Carolyn Marie Reads. I thought it was a great way to just get a lot of Dickens in, because I'm on a lifelong mission to read every Dickens novel. Easier said than done, because not all Dickens was created equal, but I really enjoyed this one. I was starting to get kind of resentful of Dickens, probably because I was reading it so much for that book club, and just some of his middle works are just Barnaby and Son. Barnaby Rudge was okay. I liked that one. It was okay. Old Curiosity Shop was Martin Chuzzlewit was the first book I've DNF'd in a very long time. Could not get through that book. Martin guzzled all my time. I kid you not. But I have trust issues because of that book. So when we started reading Dombey and Son, I was like, okay, Dickens, this better be good. You better deliver. You better give me the Dickens I'm looking for, which is like the Great Expectations type Dickens that I love. And your man delivered. Your man delivered. He did so well with this one. I don't know what happened to him, but he wrote A Christmas Carol, and that just like changed the trajectory of his entire career. He wrote that book, everybody fell in love with it, and suddenly I think he realized, oh, if I like properly plan out, like actually plot out my plot, people will like the book. Oh, if I use like more sympathetic characters and less, I mean, I could still go into some stock characters, but less stock characters, people will actually be into it. And he's right. That's the ish we're looking for. That's it. And this book was exactly him putting that into action. And this, I feel like, is like the first of his books that feel like real full Dickens. Because you still get some stock characters, you still get some like kind of hag old women, you get like your pompous capitalist men, but you also get like actually real female characters with like actual real desires and like actual psychology behind them. Revolutionary. Who would have thought that that's what we would have wanted all along? He had women with brains, because I feel like in the earlier novels, Dickens' female characters were either buxom, hot girls, little hot ladies, or they were hags. Oh, that's it? Like, that's all he had. But at the heart of it, it's about this man, Mr. Dombey. He runs this very successful shipping firm in London, so he's very wealthy. And really all he cares about is making sure that the legacy of this company is carried on. He just wants an heir, a son, of course. He wants a son to be able to take on the name of the company and run the company when he's gone. Hence, he wants the company to be run as Dombey and Son. Oh, right, he has a daughter. He has a daughter, Florence, who he just, because she doesn't serve him in that way, she doesn't mean anything to him. She's like, he doesn't pay attention to her at all, even though in her heart she's a very tender, very loving child, and all she wants is her father's affection. But he is like, you're not a boy, so go play with your nurse. He winds up having a son named after him, Paul Dombey, who's like kind of a sweet, sickly little boy, like very like Victorian waif boy. And it's just about how the family unit operates. It goes through many years. Really, it's called Dombey and Son, but the book really truly is about father and daughter and about Florence's journey to hopefully be accepted by her father, because it ain't easy. This man, I wanted to slap him so many. I was like, Dombey, you stupid ass. What are you doing? Because he makes so many decisions in this book that are just not great. So good. So good, Dickens. Like, this is the Dickens I want. He has a cohesive plot. There's a lot of side characters like usual, but the side characters, I feel like this time, instead of being like, ooh, look at this weird little distraction here, or this weird little dance over here, all the side plots actually feed back into the main plot, which is what we're kind of all hoping for, because at the end of the day, you're mostly invested, at least for me, I was mostly invested in the main plot of the family unit. All the other side people and how they inform the characters, it all makes sense. This book's hefty. She thick. I brought this with me when I would go to work, and I was like, what am I doing? I'm like carrying my laptop in my bag, all my other like accoutrement, and then also this giant, I'm carrying a brick. This could have been a weapon on the CTA. Also, what I really liked, why I really got into this book, was because I took my sweet time with it. And I took like a good month, maybe a little over a month, to read this book. And I'm really happy I did. This book was written as a serial, in serialized form. So people read it back in the day over a long period of time. And while I'm not necessarily going to like be that fundamentalist about it and like read it when those people would have read it, I still think these kind of books, because it's so thick and his prose is so dense, I think you have to take your time. It's like you wouldn't want to eat like a rich chocolate cake all in one sitting unless some evil principle is making you do it. You want to like take your sweet time with this book. And I think with Dickens going forward, that's what I'm gonna do. The next book for their book club, which they've turned into like a classics book club, is going to be David Copperfield, and that's also a thick boy. David Copperfield's got a thick ass. That I'm going to take my sweet time with as well, because I just think that's how his books should be kind of dealt with. And I'm so glad I stuck with this. It was rewarding, and this was so good. This was a 5-star. It was a 5-star read, and to start off the year with a 5-star read, I mean, we can only go up. The next one was actually a reread for me. I would not have read this book if the book club that I am a part of was not reading this. I wouldn't have read it again, because I just read this in 2022. I'm part of a book club at my local bookstore. It's a Women in Classics book club. We basically pick books that are, considered, like, widely considered classics, but we also try to, like, re-examine other books that maybe should have a classic status, or they're, like, very modern classics that have been published 25 years before, and we look at them as classics. The book is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. I love. For so long in college, even though I am a strong reader, I was always afraid to read Virginia Woolf. I think I was afraid I wouldn't understand her, or it was too convoluted, too complex. Because everybody who has read her has been like, ooh, she's a lot. She's a lot. Yes, she is a lot, but we love her. We love her so much. I've read To the Lighthouse, which I will admit, when I first read that, I was like, whoa, we're a little confused. But then when I got into it, I was like, I see what she's doing here. I read Mrs. Dalloway. So good. So good. That'll get a reread at some point. I just was blown away how she wrote that book. She was a genius. This woman was straight up a genius. And so I read this book in 2022, which is funny. I am in a little room of my own when I read it. And it is nonfiction. It's a collection of essays, some of which she delivered to I'm blanking on the name, but the girls' school at Oxford College. And then they were compiled into this book. And fantastic. It's fantastic. Is the feminism outdated? Because this was written in 1920... This was written in 1929? Yes, certainly. Certainly. And then sometimes she makes some points where you're like, that's actually still relevant. If you don't know the premise of this book, Virginia Woolf basically argues the reason that women have not been making contributions to literature as prominently or as often as men have is because they often have not had a room of one's own to write in, and they haven't had the financial means to be able to write. And, I think that's a very intersectional discussion these days. You can go about it a bunch of different ways nowadays. But fundamentally, I think it's true. Like, if your basic needs aren't being met, can you produce as well creatively? I don't know. It's an argument. The way it's laid out is very strange, because she goes from, like, a dinner at her college where she's like, like, we don't get treated, because we're women at this women's college, we're not treated with the same respect. And so then that makes her kind of go in this, like, long rambling musing of, like, well, why is that? Why do I have to, like, get permission to go inside the library? Like, I have to get a man's written permission to be able to, like, go in and browse the library. I can't just go in. Like, why is there so much inequity? And, like, why are we the poorer sex is what she kind of always refers to women as. And then that kind of leads her into musing, and she comes up with this thesis. And it's a great text. It's just talking about women in writing, women in creating. I'm not gonna lie, she comes up with this whole scenario that, like, yes, Shakespeare is a genius. We can all acknowledge that. Wrote amazing plays, has stood the test of time. She makes the argument that if Shakespeare had a sister who had the same intellectual and same creative abilities as him, she would not have made it as far, because back in Elizabethan England, she just would not be able to go join actors and go write. She makes this whole argument that this woman would have basically tried to get to London, would have been impregnated by some man out of wedlock, and would have perished. Fun! Girl boss! At the end of the book, like, goes back to her and talks about, like, how we should honor the fact that, Shakespeare's sister would have never gotten the chance. And the first time I read it, I was moved to tears. I was like, oh yeah, like me living now, in 2023, I do have a room of my own, I do have my own income, I am able to create not only, like, as a writer and as a reader, but also as an actor. Like, I can live my life and create when there were women who probably had every urge to do so but couldn't. And it makes me very emotional. Yeah, so I was very happy to read this again. This is a 5-star read for me. And it's one that I think I can always just go back to and refer to. Also, Virginia Woolf's little stabs at men are, like, a little petty, but they're really funny. Because she's, like, she's not always calling them out, but she's always kind of, like, like, just a little, like, okay. She's just a G. I love Virginia Woolf, and I can't wait. I think later this year I'm reading Orlando, and I'm very excited. I just want to read everything by her. I really am a big Virginia Woolf fan, so this was a 5-star read. I also will say this is the kind of book that if it doesn't hit you the first time, because I think the first 2 chapters of this book, the first time I was like, this is a book you gotta read twice. I'm just gonna say it. It's short enough. You don't have to, like, read it and then read it again right after. You can if you're nuts. But you should go back to it. This book should probably be read twice, because I think it really then solidified the second time, and I was like, I get what she's trying to say. After all, she does a little thing where she's like, here's my point, I'm gonna get to it, but I'm gonna go, oh, we arrived. She does that for everything. You gotta get used to it. But then once you do, the journey is fantastic. Room with One. I always want to call it A Room with a View. That's Forrester. That's a completely different book. Great book, but it's not that book. This is A Room of One's Own. Ooh, next was, I just picked this up because I've been wanting to read it for a long time. It's been on my shelf. And I kind of picked it up one day just to be like, let me just like skim it. And then I wound up reading the first 50 pages. And it's Autobiography of Red by Carson. This book, man, this threw me off. It really threw me off. I've never read anything quite like this. I'm not really a poetry person. I'm not. I used to have to read it for school, read it for like the AP test. You had to master how to read poetry so that you could answer your little critical multiple choice questions about it. But I remember being like, if I was like forced to know what the poetry was and not let it just like kind of wash over me and I got to ponder it, I just wasn't as interested. I was really where my heart and soul has really always been is literature. So poetry sections, I'd be like, okay. So as a whole, as an adult, if I get to read whatever I want these days, poetry is not really, it's not really up there. It's just not really what I want. I'd heard so much about this book, especially from BookTube, and so I was like, okay, like if it's technically it's a novel in verse, I'll give it a shot. If it's a novel in verse, I'll try it. Again, I'm a little bit ignorant on how verse is really constructed. I'm not as well versed. Once we got into this, oh boy, it's so subtle. And there's images I think of this from this book. I finished this now. I probably finished this about 2 weeks ago. And I'm still, like, there's something, like, some images or, like, some things from this book that'll just hit me when I'm least expecting it. I'm like, oh, yes. So this book, what is this book about? It's a retelling, but it's kind of like a prequel coming-of-age tale about this very obscure myth. It's the first time I'd really heard of this myth, about this myth with Geryon. Geryon? I'm totally going to pronounce this wrong. Geryon? Geryon was this monster, this kind of red monster that lived on this island. And Hercules, as part of one of his many feats that he has to complete, sees this monster. And for some reason, this monster has this, like, he's a red monster and he has red cattle. And Hercules, as one of his trials of feats of strength, he really covets this red cattle. And so one of his things is to go in there and kill Geryon. And then he also uses, Hercules has that very famous club, uses his club to kill Geryon's dog. It's this kind of this obscure myth. It is depicted in an epic poem by one of those, old guy poets, which I'm totally gonna pronounce this name wrong, so I'm gonna put it in writing here. Stestikoros? It's almost like this myth wouldn't have really been propagated if this guy hadn't wrote this poem about it. And then Anne Carson decided that that's what she wanted to focus on for this novel in verse. But this book is telling, like, kind of, again, I say it's like a prequel because it's telling about Geryon's coming of age as this kind of red being, this kind of outsider who his whole life has never felt comfortable with himself and has always felt very, very uncomfortable being who he is. His father is absent in the book. His mother is like, she's there, but she's a little detached. She's kind of off doing her own thing. But the brother is very abusive and also, spoiler alert, kind of sexually abusive to his young brother Geryon. And then Geryon, as he gets older, falls in love with a man named Heracles or Hercules. The two kind of form this relationship. It ultimately leads to Geryon becoming comfortable with himself and like coming into himself. So it's like a queer coming of age novel told in verse. I read this so fast. I sped through this like no one's business. I just went through it so fast. I was like, oh, I'll skim it, and I read the first 50 pages like it was nothing. Like a lot of it was so sparse because it's told in verse, so she has to be very careful about the words she chooses, and it's just beautiful. Beautiful coming of age. Heracles is portrayed in a way that I've never seen before because we're used to seeing him as a hero, but he comes off as kind of a, I don't want to say douchey, but like a douchey himbo a little bit. Yeah, a self-absorbed himbo is how she kind of portrays him, which is not how you're used to seeing Hercules. Hercules is usually, he's who puts the glad in gladiator, like he's usually the hero. So it was very interesting to see him in this way and just painting this sympathetic portrait of this monster as just a kid growing up who just doesn't believe in himself and doesn't think that he has any worth, and who's hiding behind. That's also the thing. He's making his own autobiography as he grows up, and he does it a lot through images and through photos, and just of course it's called the Autobiography of Red. So to me, it's almost like this whole book. The mood board obviously would all be in red, but it was almost like about the creation of red, or like what the feelings and what is behind the color red in this kind of quasi, because it felt modern, like we were in modern day, but it also didn't feel like we were part of this world. They go to Buenos Aires. It's like, it just felt like this amorphous world where they're maybe creating the color red. That's just my interpretation. It's poetry. I don't know. Maybe that wouldn't get me the correct answer on the AP test. I don't know. But that's just what I saw it as. There was just too much almost to like take in when I read it that I think I just would have to read it again. This was 4 stars. Great. Really great. Autobiography of Red. I'm so glad I got to this, and I'm so glad I just picked it up because it's kind of random. And the final book I read. The final book I read for January. I owe this author actually a huge apology. He will not be around to see this video, obviously, because a lot of the people I read are no longer with us. But I do owe this man an apology because I read one of his books in high school and despised it. Like, I read The Sun Also Rises, and I hated it with every fiber of my being because it just was so terse and stripped back that I was just like, this, I just hate this. Then I was like, I'm never going to read another novel by this author ever again. I read A Movable Feast in 2022. No, not 2022. 2020. And was like, oh, okay. I get it. Probably because at this point I had read some more books. I read The Sun Also Rises when I was 14, when, of course, I knew everything and all things. So I judged it maybe a bit too harshly. But then by the time I read A Movable Feast, tastes had really grown and expanded by this point. And then this was for the Game of Tomes book club, which used to be the Dickens and Tolstoy, but now is Game of Tomes, so in which they're taking each month you read a different classic book, and they pit 2 of them against each other. So this was part of it, and I was like, okay, all right, we hated one of them back when we were 14, and then we loved one of them when we were, how old was I, 24? So we'll see. I picked it up. I'm a little scared, but I loved it. It was Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And this is also a really good edition to get because it has the author's 1948 introduction. I never read the introductions, sorry. Early drafts and all of the alternative endings because this man wrote, because he's insane, wrote 47. He has 47 alternative endings to this book. And then why did he pick the one that he picked? Loved it. I loved it so much. I hated it and I loved it so much. Basically, this book is set in World War I, specifically on the Italian front. It's about this American man who is actually with the Italian army working as an ambulance driver, and he falls in love with this English nurse named Catherine. And it's about kind of their love story and sort of how he progresses throughout the war, his trials and tribulations throughout the war, his eventual decision to like get out of Dodge, and their relationship. Of course, it starts like any Hemingway novel. It's very curt. He's writing about the landscape, and it's very beautiful, and yet it's very matter of fact. And I just finished like a very flowery book. I finished Dombey and Son, so I was like, it's like you come to like a short stop when you read his stuff after you've read any Victorian novel. So I had to kind of readjust my brain. Once I did readjust my brain, then I got into it. I also love his dialogue is so good because it moves. It's almost like reading like a play. It's very snappy, very witty. Characters are very smart, but it still feels real to some extent. But he'll like write this snappy dialogue, and then at the end of the chapter, he'll write some like beautiful meditation on either the war or the landscape, something that like perfectly ties up what the characters were talking about and what just like ushers in a whole other mood. And I'm like, how the hell does he do that? Like, he just is so good at being so economical with his words, and yet they accomplish so much. It's just insane. And I think when I was younger, the reason I hated it so much is because he was so frugal. I really was into, at that point, like, the Victorians and, like, the sheer drama of Jane Eyre and, like, the lushness of the word. Like, I was so into that. Still am. I think I didn't, when I was younger, appreciate the real subtlety of his work. Because he was a subtle guy. I don't think living he was super subtle. Drank a lot, like big game hunting. cheated on his wife. He wasn't really that subtle as a human being, I think, but his writing was subtle, and I think when I was younger I didn't quite grasp the depth, maybe because I hadn't lived as much yet. I think to appreciate his books, maybe you have to live a little bit, and know what it is to love and to lose. But Jesus Christ, I mean, the end, the whole time I'm like, yeah, no, these characters are going along, we like these characters, they're fine, but I like them. Did not realize how attached I was to them until the end. Destroyed me. I just sat and sobbed. It hits you, and I just did not expect to be this hit by this book. She snuck up on me. Fuck you. I'm still mad about what this book did to me. Now I'm converted, and I want to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. We like Hemingway again. We like him now. It took Movable Feast to me to even get to this book, and now I'm so happy I read this book. I still give it 4 stars just because there were times I felt myself kind of, with some of his descriptions, I felt my attention kind of lagging. I don't think this isn't like a desert island book or like a ride or die book. I'm so happy to have read this. Thank you, Game of Tomes, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have picked this up for a very long time. So, very happy I picked it up. So, for January, I mean, strong for January. I came out of the gate. She's not playing. Came out with some really good reads. And most of them are because I'm part of, except for Autobiography of Red, which was just a personal choice, they're all because I'm part of these book groups that are getting me to read some really amazing stuff. So I'm feeling very good about reading right now. I'm in the opposite of a reading slump. I'm just in like a go, want to keep reading, read everything kind of mood, which is the best. I'll probably do like a vlog at some point, or like a reading updates as to what I'm reading in February, but just to I'll put it here, just to give you a glance of what I'm reading. I'm in a book club with 2 of my friends, because my 2 friends want to read more, so I was like, why don't we do a little book club? And it's a great idea. So we're reading Angels Before Man by Raphael Nicholas. Self-published book. Again, it's about a queer retelling of Lucifer. Quite good. We're taking it very slow so that we can meet every other week and talk about it and really go through it. So I'm reading that. I'm reading Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This is a reread for me. First time I read it was a long time ago in college. I'm liking it. There are some people who say that it's better than Jane Eyre. Virginia Woolf included, actually. Virginia Woolf believed that Villette was better than Jane Eyre, and I'm like, yeah, okay. That book club meeting got pushed back, so I actually don't have that book due until March for this Women in Classics group I'm in at the bookstore. So I'm not in any rush to finish that. That's kind of just when I can pick it up, I'll read it, but that's on the back burner. And then I'm reading Cultish by Amanda Montell. Nonfiction. I am a little bit too into cults, probably because I secretly know that someone could probably get me to join one, so I'm just always on the lookout, not joining any cults. I'm already an actor. A theater group is already kind of culty. But I've always been fascinated by cults, and this book is specifically talking about how language contributes to the growth of cults and why people get sucked into cults. So they're talking about Jonestown, they're talking about Heaven's Gate, they're talking about MLMs, and they're talking about beauty gurus. So she kind of goes through a whole progression of how language contributes to these many levels of cult. It's good. If you don't like nonfiction, it's a really good one to start with. It's a very millennial tone, and it's a very easy read, very quick, fun read. So I'm probably gonna finish that within 2 days. It's very compulsive. So I'm reading that, and then I'm reading for the next Game of Tomes is Once There Was a War by John Steinbeck. So the books that are going to get pitted against each other are Farewell to Arms and Once There Was a War. They're similar because they're discussing war, but they're very different. I'm going to be interested to see how they compare them, because John Steinbeck's is nonfiction, and it's good. I don't think I will love it. I'm liking it, but I don't think I'm going to love it as much as I've loved A Farewell to Arms, but we'll see. So that's just some quick updates, just a little bonus content. I hate myself. Okay. Well, thank you for joining in. If you came back, if you didn't come back, that's cool. If you want to subscribe, that's cool. This isn't my full-time job. But thanks for coming anyway. I will hopefully be back a lot quicker than last time. I know. But yeah, hopefully I'll come back with a new one. Have a good day. Bye.